As a native of Washington State, with many years of experience in real estate investment industry, Rick Fuhrman is able to offer clients a wealth of information about properties. As a member of the National Association of Realtors and Tacoma Pierce County Association of Realtors, he has the privilege of offering clients the benefits of the Northwest Multiple Listing Service. For sellers, the MLS provides the benefit of internet exposure. When you list your property for sale with Rick and Keller Williams of Puyallup, you have the comfort of knowing that your property will be promoted throughout the entire MLS, as well as numerous internet sites. Rick's staging expertise will guide you through the process of preparing your property for sale. For buyers, the MLS provides you with the benefit of an available inventory. You'll have the opportunity to work directly with Rick on any available properties listed for sale, regardless of the real estate company the property is listed with. Please welcome Rick Fuhrman.
Thank you. All right, for people who've been in this group for the 3 years that I have, or 2.5, this is going to be a rerun with a couple of additions. So anybody who has not been with the group for this long is going to have it for the first time. I guess my background gives me a unique perspective on showing houses and looking at houses. When a buyer is in looking at a house, they're looking to see if their furniture is going to fit, bless you, and whether or not they're going to have enough room in the garage for their toys. And I'm looking around, determining if something in this house is going to hurt these people or to make them sick. Any kind of exposures, any kind of problems with environmental problems. And this stems from my background as an environmental and industrial hygiene chemist for 15 years or so. So this presentation is not made to stress anybody out. It's just made to inform you of some of the dangers that may be lurking around in your house. So I'm just going to share a few of those with you guys today. The first group that I'm going to talk about are heavy metals. And this is something that you really don't hear about unless it's all over the news. And one thing that's been all over the news lately has been lead. And believe it or not, the biggest exposure problems in your house is not your water, it's not your dust, it's your paint. If you have lead-based paint in your house, this is where your biggest exposure is going to happen. Lead-based paint was used for over 100 years. And the lead was put in there as kind of a hardening agent, and with age, the lead would, or the paint chips would crack and fall down, become ground up in the ground, and even some kids would eat the paint chips if you didn't watch them close enough. Everybody my age and older knew that kid in 3rd and 4th grade. You just knew he was chewing on paint chips. So, and that's exactly what happened too. If you get exposure to lead, especially if you're a child, you're going to have some developmental issues. You're going to have some mental retardation. I guess you don't call that now, but that's kind of what happens. And if you're an adult, there are several exposure avenues in your house that may hurt you too. It isn't more of the development, but it's more of your ability to cope, your ability to think. Depending on how much lead you're exposed to, it could be pretty devastating to you and your family. I have a couple of things that I'll pass out here. First thing is, if you're going to do a transaction and you have a house built before 1978, and that's when the almighty U.S. government decided that no lead-based paint was made after that. It doesn't account for the fact that if you were a contractor and you had 20 gallons of lead-based paint, that they're not going to pay $100 a gallon to get rid of it. They probably painted your house, even though it was built in 1980. So just because you have a house that's maybe a year or two newer than that, doesn't mean that you might not have a little lead-based paint on it. But anybody who sells a property or buys a property built before 1978 is going to get the almighty 22J, which is the lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards form. And I'll pass this around so you can take a look at it. There's 3 sections on the lead-based paint form. The first one tells you a little bit about lead-based paint, what it is, what the problems are, and what you have to look for. The second one is the section where the buyer or the seller is going to fill out, and they have a couple of options there. The first one is, yeah, I got lead-based paint. Here it is, big white flag. I got lead-based paint, and you're going to have to worry about it. The next thing is, I don't have a clue if there's any lead-based paint. And that's where you want to be. You want to have absolutely no idea if there's lead-based paint, because if somebody sees that you have lead-based paint, that's a big red flag. The third section is, of course, there is no hazard. And in order to look for the hazard, you have to have it tested. The next section is for the, yeah.
And when they really have to test every single wall and ceiling in the house, or is it?
If it was me doing the testing, I would go in and I would look for specific sections of the paint that looks like it might be lead-based paint. And it's usually a little bit thicker. Sometimes it's curled up. A lot of times it's the old whitewash, the white. Yeah, and if you can take a big chip off of it and your house is old and it's never been scraped, chances are you're going to have the lead-based paint underneath. And especially if you can push on it and there's chips all over it. It's something that you don't really want to mess with, you know, but if you do have it, you want to get rid of it, call in a professional to get rid of it. Susan?
If you painted over the top of it not knowing that there was lead-based, say you did it with a non-lead base, is that going to still cause a problem?
Only if somebody takes a hammer to it and chips it off and starts chewing on it,
Okay.
or making a big dust storm. If you make a big dust storm, yeah, there's a problem. But if it's just left alone, chances are you won't have any issues at all. So anyway, that's pretty much about lead-based paint. The next thing, of course, is drinking water. And let me see here. That's next. I have a couple of different handouts for you guys. That's the third one. Okay, lead and water is a big issue right now. You guys probably started listening to it about a year ago or so when the problems with Flint, Michigan started happening. What happened there is the city of Flint, they decided that they wanted to save a little money, so they decided to take their water supply from the Flint River instead of from the Detroit's water supply. And they had all of these tests done, but they really didn't think it through very well. The water in the Flint River was just slightly acidic. And when the water was changed, all of this water that was slightly acidic went through all these old pipes. And when it sat there, if there was any lead, the lead was leached into the slightly acidic water. So any water that was sitting in those pipes was full of lead. So when you drank the water, you started getting lead poisoning. And there were a lot of properties that were built in the 1880s through the 1920s that had lead pipes. And anytime you put an acid on these pipes, it starts leaching the lead in at a higher rate than a regular water supply would. So instead of just changing that, they should have done a little bit to bring the pH of the water up to 7. And if they would have done that, it would have been a little bit less exposure. Anyway, that is kind of the same problem right now, except for the lead that is in the water supply here is based on how much lead is in your infrastructure. So if you have lead pipes, which means you have a really, really old house, chances are that you're going to have some lead in your water when you turn any of your water supplies on. Newer houses, my house was built in '64, and it's got real nice copper piping all the way through the house, but there are joints where all of the T's are, and that is soldered. And the solder back in the 60s was made of lead. And some of the solder right now is made out of lead. You play around with it, it's pretty pliable, and chances are that's got a pretty high content of lead. So anytime that water sits in your pipes, it's going to leach a little bit of lead out into it. So a good way to just get around all that stuff, especially if you have little kids and an old house, take your water, turn it on for a couple of minutes. You turn it on for a couple of minutes, and then you take your drinking water out. It shouldn't be too much of an issue. If you have a really bad lead problem, get some Culligan's water or get some kind of a Brita system that will filter out all that stuff because it is a huge issue. Next is lead and dust. If you have dust in your house, you've got lead in it. There's no way to get around it. One of the things I did when I was at the University of Washington is I managed the blood lead laboratory, and we would take people jumping through a lot of hoops. They would give us the blood samples, and I would have to analyze them to see how much lead was in that blood sample. And if anybody came in my laboratory without a white suit on, and especially if they're pushing a broom, I had to quit for the day, because just the little itty bitty bit of lead that I had in my laboratory would screw up my analysis. So if you have dust in your house, you've got lead in it. Lead came from a variety of sources. This is one handout that I'll hand around. Everybody can have one of these. This tells you where the gooseneck problems are in the water supply here in Tacoma. So it gives you an idea. If you're living in that area, you might have some goosenecks in your water system that might have a little bit of lead. But lead in this area, yeah.
Is the gooseneck on the street side or the house side?
A combination of both. The city and the county are responsible for the water supply up to your meter. You are responsible for any of your water supply from the meter through your house. So this is the public part of it, not your house. Your house, you have to make your own determination, whether you want to hire somebody or whether you think you're able to go in and take a look and see if something might be made out of lead.
Question,
Yeah.
what's a gooseneck?
Gooseneck is, it takes your water and it brings it down to a little bit lesser volume, so it's pushed at a higher flow rate. And usually it's shaped like this, so it goes around in kind of a gooseneck. So it's kind of a 90-degree corner for your piping. And if they use that gooseneck, a lot of them were made out of lead. The lead, this has been an issue for a couple of thousand years. If you read any of the old literature from Greek or Roman times, you can just read into some of these articles about these people like Tiberius and Julius Caesar and Caligula. You know that those people acted a little bit differently than normal people do. Chances are they had lead poisoning from the pipes that they had in their baths and their infrastructure. This is another handout that I'm going to give you. This shows us Pierce County and downtown Tacoma, and it shows you a little bit of some of the lead exposure risk that you have just by being in that area. The lead from this area comes from a variety of sources. The Sarco smelter was one huge place where the lead came out and contaminated pretty much everything. And also all of the vehicles that we had back in the day, for about 75, 80 years, the lead was an additive to your gasoline. And it went in through your intake manifold and right out the back of your tailpipes. One up in the air, and then it just landed wherever it happened to fall. And that's one big issue with lead and dust right now, is there's just so much of it. Eventually, it'll all end up in the ocean, but for the time being, if you got dust, you've got some lead in it. Next thing I'm going to talk about is arsenic. Arsenic is kind of unique to this area because of the industrial history that we have here. Back in the 1880s, the precursor to the Sarco smelter was built right in Ruston. So you had this big smelting plant that eventually turned into the Sarco smelter back in about 1917. So from 1917 until the mid-1980s, this thing belched out lead, cadmium, zinc, and arsenic. And the arsenic was pretty extensive. The contamination was all the way around the Ruston area, in through places like University Place, and our university laboratory had to go all the way up to Anacortes north in order to get a clean sample. Everything else in between that we sampled had a lot of arsenic in it. And for the most part, the EPA and the groups that cleaned up the area have done a good job cleaning it up. But there are still some places that have some arsenic contamination. And it's pretty much up to you if you live in one of these areas to determine if you do or not. One thing that I tell people that if I'm looking for a property over in University Place or in Ruston or Old Town or something like that, I always tell them that if they keep their grass nice and green and there's no dust, then they probably won't have an issue. If they're the type of folks that don't care about the grass being green and it gets all brown, if you have a big dust storm, when the kids are out there playing, chances are you've got a little bit of arsenic in that grass. So it's not a good thing to have this big dust storm around, especially if you have kids. And there are some programs. There is a program here in Pierce County, and there's one in King County that will allow you to get all of the contamination removed if it's up to a certain level. So if you do decide to have this contamination checked, and you do have some positive results, then you might be eligible to come in and have them pay to get rid of it. So that is a possibility. And I'm going to give you a little bit of information on that. Most of the information that I have are from the Pierce County Public Health Department, from the EPA, and from the Washington State Department of Ecology. So if you guys want additional information, it's all over the place. You can get pretty much the same thing I'm telling you today. This is for the Asarco smelter. This gives you information if you want your soil checked out and cleaned. And this, I've got a copy for everybody. It's a map of where the higher zones are for contamination of arsenic. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is asbestos. This is a really, really good thing to talk about right now because I just found out one of my listings has 58% asbestos in the crawl space. So, of course, the people that bought the house backed out. Most of the time, if you have asbestos, it's not going to bother you. If it's there and not being disturbed, it's not that big of an issue. If it's highly friable, which means if you touch it, it turns into a plume of dust, then it becomes an issue. So if you have something like popcorn ceilings in your house, unless your kid is bouncing the basketball off the ceiling, it's really no big deal. You paint over it, you keep it covered, and you shouldn't have to worry about it. Back in the probably 1880s up to the 1920s and 1930s, there was a lot of asbestos wrapping in pipe for insulation, especially the steam pipes from back then. That stuff is pretty nasty. That stuff is almost 100% usually amosite. And I actually have a photograph that I took through a microscope back in the 80s, and that would be this one. So this is what asbestos looks like through a microscope, and except for this crack here in my glass. This is 250 times, and it was through a microscope and a Minolta camera. So I took a bunch of pictures, and I got to keep them. But you see all of these ends have ends too, and if you look real closely, some of these even have even smaller fibers, and these are fibers of mostly silicon, but if they are put in this kind of a formation, then they become hazardous. And this stuff, you can actually go into the mountains and you can find this stuff. I mean, it just is a formation. It's a rock formation. But this stuff, if it's around and it's in the air, it gets into your lungs and it sticks in your lungs, and your body can't get rid of it. So instead of getting rid of it through the saliva and the stuff in your lungs, sorry about doing this while you're eating, but it ends up forming a fibrosis on the end of it. So each one of those ends has a little fibrous piece, and that just keeps growing. And eventually it becomes into asbestosis, which is it's pretty close to emphysema, kind of like what I got right now. But anyway, if you were exposed to this stuff, it's not easily gotten rid of. It's something that you have to deal with. It's chronic, and eventually it does turn into lung cancer. So you want to minimize your exposure to any kind of asbestos. This other photograph I have here is a different type of asbestos, and I have a comparison for you. So if you look at this is an asbestos called chrysotile, and that's the blue and the orange here. This big, huge log right here, that's a piece of fiberglass. So you can tell how small these fibers are compared to this fiberglass. If you go up to 500 times on the magnification, each one of these ends is going to have ends too. So I've looked at this stuff through a microscope, and thank you. I think I'm going to take that. Talking too much here. Anyway, this kind of stuff, if you have it, you need to have it taken care of. You need to have it sealed up. If you can get it sealed up, if it is an issue with somebody, you should get it taken care of. There are abatement companies that will do this. Last time I was on an abatement site was in 2012. A company sent me up to Sitka, Alaska to be the safety supervisor and the lab monitoring. So any kind of asbestos that people are being exposed to, I was responsible for making sure that their health and safety was taken care of first. So it's kind of an interesting job, pretty dangerous. A lot of these people, they do the work, they don't really care. They just want to get paid, and they don't care about what they're being exposed to. So it kind of becomes an issue. All right, next thing I'm going to talk about, oil tanks. If you have an older house, I'm going to pass this around too, chances are you've had some kind of oil being used as fuel. Some of them, I'd say 1 out of 10 older houses that I run into now still have oil tanks in them. And there's a whole set of rules and regulations that usually come with having a fuel tank. Fuel tanks in homes, in residential homes, are not regulated. The issue you might have is a bit of an ethical issue. It's something you have to kind of wrap around in your brain. The thing to do, the nice thing to do might be to get rid of that environmental problem, but the issue is as soon as you uncork that environmental problem, it becomes a huge monster. If you have an old oil tank that hasn't been decommissioned and it's still in your yard and you decide, I'm going to get rid of that because it's the right thing to do. You call in a backhoe, you have a big truck, and they lift it up and they take it out. It costs you $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 maybe. If there's a leak in that oil tank, if it's found out that the bottom is rusted, if there's a little sheen in the gravel underneath it, that's when you're going to have to pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to get that fixed. So it's kind of up to you. Do you want to take that chance? It's the same thing with asbestos. If you want to get rid of that asbestos, it's going to cost you $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, depending on what kind of a problem it is, how easily it's accessed. So it's something you have to really think about before you open up the can of worms. Every time you sell a house, you have to fill out something called a disclosure statement. It's the good old Form 17, and it gives you ample information about how to disclose all this stuff. And if you put I don't know, I don't know, I don't know in every one of the categories, then nothing is an issue. But if you have lead-based paint, if you have asbestos, if you have any kind of contamination and you know about it, you have to put a yes there. And then you have to take a whole page and explain what you know about that situation. And if you say no or I don't know, it's not an issue. If you say yes, it becomes an issue. So it's something you might want to think long and hard about before you open up the can of worms that may be sitting in your house. Most of the time, it's not an issue. Sometimes it becomes an issue. All right. You guys remember that guy in 3rd, 4th grade, the one that was chewing on the paint chips? Well, guess what? He's in your rental house now. And he's decided that in his infinite wisdom, he's going to brew up a batch of meth in your house. Okay, it doesn't happen very often, but every now and then it does. The company that I used to work for back in the 90s and late 80s, they got the national contract for the DEA to clean up clandestine drug labs. So they sent all our techie types down to Fremont, and we went through a week's training on cleaning up asbestos or clandestine drug labs. And our job was to get on our little white suits and our white panel van. And when they couldn't call you then, but we had a pager. And when we were paged, we had to get our rear in gear and get out to the site. And while we were waiting for people to get hired, I got 2 calls. One was right in the middle of a Husky game, and I wasn't happy about that. Neither was my wife. The second one was in the middle of the night. We got called, got in our little white suits, went down with the panel van, pulled into the front yard, and there's the dude sitting there watching TV in his underwear. And he's got a big bowl of what we figured out was Cheerios. And he looks at us, and we looked at each other, and we decided we got there a little too early. So we pulled out and went around the block. And it turns out that the DEA guys didn't call us in time. They had some kind of an issue, and they didn't bust it in time. So we ran around the block, and they busted it, and then we came back in. But the issue with clandestine drug labs, you might not know, but there are 3 main issues. Number 1 is the contamination. Number 2 are the drugs. I guess there's 4. Number 3 is the money. And number 4, booby traps. They have all sorts of stuff that they do when they're not quite thinking right, but they hide the money, they hide the drugs, everything else goes up the chimney. So everything is hidden except for this big smell. And when you're around a clandestine drug lab, usually you smell the smell of ether. And if you've ever tried to start your car using a can of ether, diethyl ether, methyl ethyl ether, something like that, you spray a little bit and you have to hold your breath. And unless it goes right in your intake manifold, if it gets in your face, you can't hardly breathe. But these people, they put it on the stove, they lit their cigarettes, they're lucky that they don't blow up, but they'll still make that meth. And when you have it in your house, it's a big mess. And usually people will take out the rugs and maybe take out some of the cabinets and replace those. If you do that and you sell your house, the new family that moves in is going to sit there for a while and wonder why their eyes are always hurting, and pretty soon they're going to have some respiratory problems, and then they're going to end up in the hospital. And if you didn't do a good enough job, you may be liable for all of that. And if you call up your insurance man, what's your insurance man going to say? That's if you're lucky. If you're lucky that it's covered, then you might have a $5,000 deductible. Usually they're going to say, sorry, that ain't covered, you should have known. So if you're on the hook for that, you're going to have to rip out all of the flooring, all of the subflooring, anything that's a press board of any kind. You're going to have to take out your walls, all of your plaster on your walls, all of your sheetrock, any kind of insulation, all has to be taken out. And the same thing with your roof. That all has to be taken up all the way to the rafters, and you have to replace everything. Otherwise, if you put it all back together and all that stuff isn't taken care of, you're going to end up with somebody getting sick down the line. So the nice thing about having the EPA take care of this, though, is that from now until eternity, your house gets put on a nice little list. It's called the, what is it called? Got it here. The National Clandestine Laboratory Register. And this is actually a list of every place in Washington. And I have one that's 3 blocks away from my house. If you guys want to check to see if your house might be on it, have at it. And this is also a list of the drug labs by county and by year. So you can tell, and you'll notice by looking at this, that Pierce County is way off the wall for clandestine drug labs. We have up through 2012, if I can read this, I've got my glasses right here, I can do this, 3,979 labs from 1990 through 2012. The next closest county is King County with 1,685. So that tells you what happened in Pierce County over those years.
So we have more entrepreneurs? Is what
We
you're saying?
do, as a matter of fact, more paint chips. No, that's just how many of them happened. Yes, no per capita. This is how many of them were busted. And this is just by the EPA. If you were lucky enough to have some of your neighbors call you up and say, hey, dude, you got some smell coming out of your house, you better take care of this, then you might have nipped it in the bud. You may have had a huge problem taken care of. If you had the local police come in and they busted them for something other than that, other than the drug lab, you also might have a second chance, even though it's going to be very expensive because you have to get rid of all that stuff and do it right in order to resell the house or re-rent the house. But once it's on the clandestine drug registry, your history, your toast. And there are things that you have to do to get rid of that stuff too, and they have national and local guidelines as to what you have to do to make sure that you can put that house back on the market. And there are special construction companies, contracting companies that'll do that. All right, what's next on the list? It was all fun. You guys, this isn't meant to scare you, right? Yeah, go ahead.
The clandestine registry that you were just talking about. Now, am I missing something, or many times it seems like it would be cheaper financially and in terms of aggregation to just bulldoze that stuff?
Mm-hmm.
All right? Now, if you do that, does that take that address, so to speak, off that registry, or is that address, no matter whether it's an old house or a new house, is that always going to be on that registry? In other words, how do you get off that registry?
I haven't paid attention enough to know. I haven't had anybody ask that question. The only way I'd look into it more is if one of my listings was a clandestine drug lab and somebody came to me for ideas. I would call up the DEA and say, listen, how do we get off that list? That's the only way I'd be able to find out, though, is by calling them up.
You know, if you bulldoze it, or if somebody cooking meth in there blows blows the thing up and it
Yeah.
burns to the ground, it seems to me that it's taking care of itself.
Yeah, and generally, that kind of thing is taken care of with a Form 17. Yeah, this place was a clandestine drug lab. We took care of the whole thing. We bulldozed everything. It's got a new house on it, new landscaping. It's gone. And that usually takes care of stuff like that. All right, next thing are water wells. Most properties don't have water wells. You have a public water supply. But every now and then, 3 minutes? I'm not even close to being done. I'll do this real fast then. This is a water well addendum. Generally, if you have a water well, I recommend that you get it tested for coliform bacteria. That's about it. Also, maybe turbidity to see how much garbage is in there, how much settlement you get. If there's something in particular, like if there's a big group of cars that have been sitting there for 20, 30 years, I might have them test it for gasoline or something like that in the water. But generally, the only thing I deal with is coliform bacteria. And that can be caused by a multitude of different things. Maybe your septic system is in the wrong place. And maybe you got a rat that was inside your water well. It just needs to be taken care of. There are several ways to do it. Most of the time on a lab or in a well like that, you just pour some bleach down it and then turn on the water supply, turn on all the spigots, and run it for an hour or two until you don't taste the bleach in it. But here's the next one. This is for your sewage and septic system. If you have a septic tank in Pierce County, you're required to get a health certificate from the county, from the health department. And what that amounts to is you have to have a septic company come in and inspect it and pump it. And it's usually $350 to $450. And then you put in with the health department to get a health letter. And what they do for their $35, $40, they come over with their truck, the guy with the little plastic hat on looks to see if there's a hole that's been dug in the ground, and he'll check it off the list. And then he'll send you an OSS and a diagram of your septic system so that you know where everything is, if it is on supply, if it is on the list with the county. Next thing, I'm going to run out of time real quick. How much time do I have? 1 minute? Okay, that was about 2/3 of it. What I'm going to do is open it up for discussion now if you want. I have this. This is what happens when you get your septic system checked out, and this is one I was going to talk about, which is mold. Mold is a whole separate set of problems that you can get rid of. If you have issues like that or any other kind of issues, call me up and tell me about it, and I can pretty much tell you what your options are for taking care of some of these issues. Okay, questions?
How accurate was Breaking Bad?
Most of it was pretty dead on. I actually, when I was married, my wife is a pharmacist, and our best friend was the Thurston County Sheriff. And we told him one day, we said, you know something, Howard? We could have a clandestine drug lab in this house, and you wouldn't have an idea, sitting here having a beer in my front yard. And he said, no way in heck. And I told him how I would do it. And his eyes got all big, and he said, yeah, you're right. If somebody knows what they're doing and they run it like a professional laboratory, Breaking Bad can be right on. The problem is the greed, the money, the issues that come with the drugs and the people who take the drugs. It's not a good scene. People can make more money doing other things.
Usually the people producing them are also using them?
Yes, yeah. In their infinite wisdom, they will smoke a drag of cigarette and they'll blow themselves up because they were stupid. And all because of a couple of paint chips in the 3rd grade.
He would have just stayed Walter White and not become Heisenberg.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and don't tell your brother who's a cop about it either.
Another question.
Yeah.
At the risk of asking you to practice medicine, back in the days when I was working for a living, I took a disability claim from a man who had worked for years and years in the automotive industry. He had mesothelioma, not pretty close.
Mesothelioma, yeah.
Yes. How is that different from asbestosis?
It's real close to the same thing. Yeah, as a matter of fact, we did a lot of testing in automotive companies for asbestos in their brakes and in their clutches. And there was a high probability that the clutches built back in the in the day, before the late 1970s, most of that stuff had asbestos in it. And if you were exposed to that brake dust, that stuff went into your lungs, and it caused mesothelioma, which is a type of cancer. And it's after you get the asbestosis. Well, like I said, this stuff is just so you're aware of stuff. I mean, if you're worried about stuff in your house like this, if you're worried about it all the time, I'd be more worried about crossing the parking lot and getting run over. So, it's just meant to give you a little bit of information, just enough to, if you do have a concern about it, call me up and talk me through it, and I'll tell you, whatever my little expertise can tell you, and give you some guidelines. Okay? All right. Thank you.